Hi, everybody. Today's September 15th, 2023, and I'm honored to have Clifton Duncan with us today. Tell us about your story, your journey of late.
Well, of late, it's really interesting that the last few years have been filled with. Oh, first of all, thanks, Randall, for having me on. I've forgotten my manners. But my story of late, there's been a lot of turmoil over the past few years, obviously. It's been very emotionally difficult and challenging. So, what I've really been focusing on lately is is building very small disciplines. I feel like I've been forced to kind of start over and live my life in a way that I've never had to really live it before, and I'm finding a lot of wisdom in ancient Greeks and Romans. Actually, it's funny because I don't know if you've seen that meme going around that men think about the Roman Empire or something. Like,
yes, I did. I just saw that today for the first time. It's funny you mentioned that.
Well, yeah, which is funny. Well, in terms of thinking about the collapse of an empire, but also some quotes from Seneca and other Stoics, like of course Marcus Aurelius. Help as well. So it is interesting that how much these people had figured out thousands of years ago. And,
I know, it's incredible. I don't want to interject too much, but first of all, I did neglect to mention that you're an actor, singer, writer, and all around talent. So I want my audience to know that. But I'm married to a classics professor, and
nice.
Her expertise are Latin, Greek. We kind of have our own little internal meme because my wife, whatever we're talking about, we could be talking about plants or new linen for whatever, and she's like, well, the Romans, and so it's kind of like a very familiar trope at dinner parties, whatever. I say, the Romans, and it's just I tease her about it, but it's been very informative. I've become far more classically knowledgeable than I had been, and it is amazing how lively the quote unquote ancients are, and how much they are not ancient. I mean, my wife is reading Aristophanes right now, and implores me to read Aristophanes again. I've read some, but I haven't read any lately.
Well, you go back and read. I mean, I was reading Prometheus Bound recently, and as well as Oedipus, Sophocles' Oedipus. I want to read more Aeschylus as well, and it doesn't. The works don't have quite the perhaps the depth and the nuance that we're used to now in the age of post realism or naturalism in theater or in acting styles, but yet there's still a lot of psychological depth there, a surprising amount of rich relationships. I think people use the term red pilling, and they use it in different ways, but generally it means when you sort of break out of the matrix and realize that pretty much everyone is lying to you. But when I look at these old plays, I sort of came by it naturally because I began to realize that you read around them, you research around them when you're preparing to perform them. And what I learned is that even though customs change and mores change, technology obviously has advanced. Fundamentally, what motivates human beings has not changed for thousands and thousands of years. So you can go back and look at these plays, and we call them period pieces, and I think it's sort of alienating, unnecessarily so, and because they're plays about us, really. And what's great about these works is that they're unencumbered by political correctness, so they can actually tell the truth about who we are, and about and sometimes it's really ugly, but it's very, very. I think there's a reason why we still revere these works thousands of years after they were first created.
So I'd like to kind of continue on this theme. What do you see as the role of artists in today's society? In your opinion, how can artists maintain their authenticity amidst kind of the prevalent cancel culture? And to wit, we've talked so much about classical pieces and so forth, but dead white men. How does that all relate? How does it, who are we? How do we bond together, and how do we come together in this moment after so much kind of social upheaval, coincident with the the kind of societal trauma of COVID-19 mixed in with race riots, et cetera?
Well, I've been wrestling with this question myself, especially in the United States. You have people like Camille Paglia, bless her. She's been sounding the alarm for decades. I mean, I think she has a quote. I'm going to butcher it, but it's something like,
Yeah.
political power is transient, but the art that a culture produces lives on forever, or at least it can live on forever.
Hmm.
And I'm always hesitant to say that art should be this and that artists should do that. People enjoy different art for different reasons. I listen to classical on one day, or I listen to Afrobeat another day, or disco or rap, on different days,
Hmm.
depending on how I'm feeling. But I think the answer I'm coming to, as far as the role of artists, I mean, and again, the Greeks sort of understood this, right? That art can be medicine. I think art is medicine for the soul and the spirit. And right now, I think that the most crucial role that artists can take is to create great work because, um, in contrast to, say, religion, or in contrast to politics, art is one of the few realms that can bring people together. You look at a beautiful painting, a beautiful sculpture, a great song, a great story, a great drama. And it doesn't matter where you
Hmm.
came from, doesn't matter what your educational background is, doesn't matter your level of intelligence, but you know how it makes you feel and how it impacts you. And that is the power, I think, of the artist. They can transcend the intellect, even though, great writers or great playwrights can, of course, transmit ideas and tickle your intellect. But at the end of the day, the transmission is only temporary if they don't leave some sort of indelible impression. The way you do
Hmm.
that is to move their emotions, and you move their hearts. And I think it's sad today. You mentioned cancel culture, well, and authenticity. Well, you can't be authentic in the midst of extreme cancel culture, which tends to come, at least in this particular era, from, I guess I'll call them far left radicals, activists, whatever you want to call them. And what's funny is that none of this is even new. There's a great essay by a man named Albert Maltz, who was far from right wing. In fact, he was a communist. And he wrote this essay called What Shall We Ask of Writers, back in 1946. And in it, he just takes a hatchet to left wing orthodoxy and how it ruins art. It limits artists. It turns art. He uses the term art as a weapon. It turns art into a weapon for socio-political engineering. The plays and novels that are produced by these people become nothing more than political pamphlets. That's a term that he uses, and it also affects critics and critical culture. I mean, we see the same thing playing out today. There was a scandal recently with Rotten Tomatoes, the review aggregator, where, and people have noticed this over time, where you'll see professional critics, quote unquote professional critics, give a movie a high rating or a low rating, but then the audience score
Hmm.
is directly is like the inverse,
Yeah.
and so there's there's a huge disconnect, I think, in these sort of professional, I call them sort of bourgeois classes right now, especially that are producing arts, or they have control of our museums, our arts organizations and institutions, our theaters, our and other venues. And because artists now are forced to operate within a very narrow set of ideological parameters,
Hmm.
they can't really be authentic. And if they can't be authentic, they can't tell the truth about who we are as people, like the ancients could. And because they can't do that now, they're alienating more and more people. That's what's happening with the theater right now. The theaters are collapsing across the country. They're closing. They're truncating their seasons. Broadway audience attendance has not returned to the record highs that it reached in the
Hmm.
2018-2019 season. And people are sitting there wondering what's going on. It's like, well, you're producing work that no one wants to see, so and that no one recognizes themselves in. Um, so it's a huge problem. So I guess the role of the artist right now, is to focus on creating, um, maybe return to focus on creating work that explores classical, universal human themes. Perhaps. I mean, again, I'm loath to say what artists should do. I think they should follow their own creative impulses and creative drives, but the problem is those creative drives and impulses right now, if you want to be a professional artist, I think they sort of have to be marshaled within a very um, you know, uh, you have to sort of operate within the bounds of certain ideological, like I said, barriers, I think.
Hmm. That's excellent. Well put. Um, we there's Marxism and not. Um, you know, Malcolm X, I think, said by any means necessary, but that is part of the Marxist creed, where in any tool can be used. It's irregular fighting. Um, at one point, Cuba was lauded for having so many physicians, had more physicians per capita than any other place on earth. And there was this term in China as well, the barefoot doctors. But it went, but deeper down, and I actually worked with an ex-Soviet physician, part of that same kind of system where they produced a lot of physicians. And I'm a medical doctor, and but in fact, it was a very thin veneer of application of what it is to be a physician. They were taught certain applications and wrote um, kind of repetitive methodologies so they could do certain things in certain circumstances if it was part of the playbook, but they were unable to adapt or think or act on their feet. And so it was a very superficial application, kind of like the term Potemkin village, whereas there's the thin veneer, kind of like a stage set of something that looks like something, but there was no depth to it. And when push came to shove, those physicians are not necessarily providing better medical care because they can't really adapt to a different situation, provide, say, the art of medicine and deal with a person's own emotions and situations that pertain to that, maybe superficial diagnosis. Not everyone's going to react the same way to a melanoma. People have different, issues at hand and so forth. Anyway, I apologize for that example, but I see this similarly into other aspects where people are either going to be part of a team where they're told what to do and they have kind of minimal instructions, like you're an extra in a movie. You know how to stand there and look like you're talking and act a certain way, and nobody really cares because that's the background. But I think the focus of all our art, the thing that really brings us together, similar to the medical example, is that kind of connection where you're going to actually talk with somebody and deal with them and deal with their own issues. And art doesn't do that in the same way medicine does, obviously, because medicine's at the moment interactive. But I think if you ignore that part where you're actually talking and dealing with people in your art, then you have failed. And I don't know if you see any resonance in what I've said, whether it's way off mark. I'm just curious about that, first of all, and then I'm going to ask you a question.
Well, like I said before, I listen to different things at different times. I long ago I had a really, really bad breakup, and this was back when Netflix still sent out physical DVDs. And there was a movie called Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which featured Russell Brand and Kristen Bell and Jason Segel. And it was about this guy played by Jason Segel who had just been dumped by his girlfriend for this Russell Brand character. He's hilarious in that movie. He's very obnoxious, this obnoxious musician. But the movie is about this man who is recovering from his grief from losing the love of his life. And it's treated very comedically. There's one scene where he's in his hotel. He takes a vacation out to Maui, or Hawaii, I should say. And of course, his ex-girlfriend or ex-fiance is also out there. So the comedic hijinks ensue. But there's a scene where he gets a phone call from the concierge at the hotel. And and the concierge says, "Hey, sir, we got a complaint from someone in the next room. They heard a woman weeping." And of course, it was the Jason Segel character who was crying because, But the film is great because by the end of it, he finds new love, but it comes after he decides to really pursue his own creative impulses. He has a musical about Dracula that he's been working on. It's kind of dumb and silly, but he continues to kind of have faith in himself and to continue working on it. And by the end of the film, he's found Mila Kunis, who's just a better person, and his ex-girlfriend is trying to get back with him and everything. So it's sort of it's kind of wish fulfillment, but at the end of the day, it was so profoundly healing for me to see that. And I needed to see that.
That's an important point.
That film. And, I wore that DVD out. I held on to it for such a long time. And it really helped me get through. This story helped me get through a really hard time.
That's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I think that the Chinese write in pictograms. We have letters, and I think letters are far more adaptable. 26 letters, and you can make any length of words. Where the Chinese need like hundreds, tens of thousands, if not 100,000 different pictograms to describe things. So you have to endlessly learn all these pictograms. And I don't think it's a cumbersome way to actually write language, but I do think the pictograms actually represent more of what we think and act. We act and think in terms of pictures and stories, and so we're not kind of lineal binary computing processors such as computers are. And again, I think a keyboard is going to do much better with 26 letters than it would with tens of thousands of pictograms somehow. And I don't know how really they construct Chinese keyboards. Probably they work all the letters. Anyway, it's a complicated task to even just think about transcribing the writing. But I do think the pictogram aspect is how we operate. We operate and we connect through stories. And that's the amazing kind of unwritten language, kind of like the thrum, the sub-frequency of what you have around you, that you can see things, you can see a tree and this and that, but it's all colored by the mood, the time, the essence, things that happened to you last night and so forth. And how you approach the day is a matter of kind of mental and physical exercise. And to that point, you play an instrument. I'm not sure if you actually play an external instrument, but you play an instrument that is yourself. So tuning you is essential to the act of. I mean, I'm only guessing here. You're gonna have to tell me. To the act of being an actor and a dancer and so forth. You are your physical presence in your body and your spirit, in a sense, is your instrument. How do you tune that, and how do you approach that in general? On a physical basis, and how did you approach it these last few years?
Well, I think a lot of people don't understand. I think because of TV and film, they think that acting is merely a matter of showing up and learning your lines, and and really in TV you can be that lazy, partly because especially if you're working in episodic television, there's just no time to really get into the nitty gritty. And if you're a series regular, aka a lead on a series, a lead character, then the writers end up learning who you are. They write around you, so you don't have to do that much work. And and part of it is just it's a matter of efficiency. But the actor, the serious actor, they, for one, and this is sort of changing now because our standards are eroding for the sake of things like body positivity. But you'll read all these classic acting texts, and one of the first things they talk about is the training of the body. When because you have to be pleasing to look at. I forgot which book it was, but your body needs to be supple. It needs to be strong. You need to have endurance and stamina, especially if you're, playing in a big Broadway house. You have to reach the back of the house. And whether you're doing Hamlet or Hamilton, you have to have the energy and the endurance to put on these plays. But not only that, you're expending a lot of vocal energy and vocal presence in order to fill a house. I mean, and it's amazing if you see an actor like a James Earl Jones or a Viola Davis on stage, and you really understand the power and presence that just a great vocal instrument can bring, because you're literally producing waves of sound and vibration which are hitting the audience. And the more that you can do that, the more of an impact you'll have on that audience. So it's important to train up that part of yourself, and it's very difficult, and it involves an integration of the breath. The voice is a bodily function, but it's the breath, the body, all that stuff. The rib, you're sort of stretching and expanding your rib cage to increase your lung capacity, all these things. On top of that, though, there's your emotional instrument, which you have to learn how to marshal. As actors, you have to be very open and vulnerable. And all great drama and comedy lives sort of in the underbelly, the emotional underbelly of who we are. And normal people try not to feel, but actors try to feel. And part of your technique is learning, what your personal emotional triggers are and how to access those emotions on command and control them. And so, I mean, it is when people say actors are crazy or whatever, I mean, it's not far from the truth. You have to, another aspect of it is you have to sharpen your intellect and your imagination in order that you can enter into these fictional worlds and make yourself believe in these fictional circumstances. So there is an art and a technique to it. And then and then you get into more nuance. If you're looking at, you ask yourself questions about the character, about, what's their economic and educational background? Do they come from more of a working class kind of background, so they don't really talk as more refined, or are they more educated and they speak in a certain way? They maybe had a more aristocratic background. So and then there's different other flavors you can add. I mean, how fast do they talk? I'm sitting here down south, and people have a whole different way of talking versus when they're up north, and they're more curt and more. I mean, you said you're in the Boston area, so it's a different kind of thing. So there's an infinite variety and range of choices you can make, and the great actor, which separates the good actor from the great actor, is the ability. I think there's a combination of conscious choices and unconscious, intuitive choices that are made, instinctual choices that are made in the creation of a character. And it's just and you read a script, you analyze it, you break it down. Everyone works differently, but you go from scene to scene, even line to line. Why am I saying that? How do I feel about it? What are my relationships to the characters in this moment? What's my relationship to myself? What's my point of view? If people knew how much work goes into a great performance, there would be far fewer actors, and the world would be a better place for it. So if people who really take their craft seriously, I mean, it is a craft. I say to people, some people learn how to build computers. Some people learn how to, build, houses or furniture. My job is to build a character, and there's a lot of work that and nuance that goes into it. And sometimes, you pick up a script and you read it and you say, oh, I get this person. I don't really need to, like me personally, I have a certain sort of acerbic sense of humor. I've been a smart ass my whole life. So if there's a character that I see as kind of charming and charismatic and in that kind of way, I'm like, oh, I know how to do that. I know how to say this in a way to make this character more attractive. And it's really fun when you can apply that to someone who's a villain, because then the bigger craft takes hold of what kind of journey do I want to take the audience on. So at the beginning of the play, for instance, I did a play called The Piano Lesson a few years ago in Hartford, Connecticut. And this character, he comes off initially just, he's really unapologetic. He's very brash, very talkative and very funny. But I said, what if by the end of the play, you get the audience to fall in love with this character, but he becomes so obsessed with this one goal that he becomes abusive, a little bit almost psychotic. That would be an interesting journey. Like, to me, that sounds like an attractive journey to make. And you have to hope that you're working with a director and other actors who can go along with you and realize that. So there's a lot of training, a lot of thought, a lot of consideration, but also a lot of imaginative work that goes into what actors do, at least at a high level. That's a long answer to your question, I think.
No, that's a great answer. And so, I think you provide. I mean, I can't grade actors on this type of journey, but I think you probably, I'm guessing, provide a lot more thought and effort into that than many do. And to that point, how does it feel to have a lot of that? So you let's say this is a neighborhood and you've built kind of the nicest house in the neighborhood. You've got a driveway, you've painted the details, you might have a gargoyle or two out front, you've got a nice gravel driveway, and you've taken care of it and you've manicured and so forth. And then all of a sudden the city comes along and condemns it. It's like, wait, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, have you been able to perform your craft to the same extent you would like of late? Have you been branded, expelled, and so forth? I mean, Novak Djokovic, I think he just won the U.S. Open, but he had not been there for a couple of years because New York City would not allow him in. Healthy as he was, clearly he survived COVID-19 somehow. He would not have given it to anybody. I'm pretty sure he'd had the actual immunity to the illness itself. There's no point in getting a vaccine after the fact. We never really perpetrated that. How do you feel? Do you have umbrage? Do you, first of all, is this an occurrence? Has your career arc, as far as acting goes, been on the same pathway?
Well, as far as I know, my career as I knew it is dead. For those who don't know, I mean, I'm not an activist about this kind of stuff, but for me, I caught the disease in December of 2020 before the vaccines were rolled out, and it just didn't make any sense to me. Why would I vaccinate myself against something that my body has already cleared, or a virus that my body's already cleared? If the spike protein is as toxic as we're saying it is, then why would I inject myself with something that would make my body produce more of that toxic substance after I've already cleared it? These were rushed through production. I didn't trust the level of testing. And you had people like Peter Doshi at the British Medical Journal who were raising, I think, really, really good questions about the testing and the testing phase, the clinical trial process. And then you have these corporations like Pfizer and Moderna, which have checkered pasts in and of themselves. There was the whole culture around, whether or not you're going to get vaccinated or not. This unprecedented public campaign, worldwide campaign to pressure people into getting. I mean, there was so much that went into it, but I was also very vocal that, and I'm speaking as somebody who was in the COVIDian cult from about January to March of 2020. So I was very much like, hey guys, there's a virus coming. I was at auditions like, I'm not going to shake your hand because there's a virus coming. But over time, my mind began to change, and I felt like what we were doing to mitigate the spread of the disease was not going to be not only ineffective, but cause more harm than good. And I was very vocal about that. And as a result, I lost my manager, I lost my voiceover agent, but I was also speaking out about certain social issues. I mean, the industry and the nation as a whole went full on. After the George Floyd death, the riots and everything. And I just was very moved to begin speaking out on these things. And I appeared on certain podcasts like Tim Pool's show. I was on Trigonometry as well. A woman named Carrie Smith, who was instrumental in a lot of this stuff. I went on her show. And since then, my profile has kind of grown. And I think part of the problem with the industry is that I've aligned myself, or at least my career is like I've aligned myself with certain what they view as unsavory characters who have unsavory beliefs. And I've always maintained throughout this time, like, guys, I'm not particularly right wing, maybe economically in some sense, but even then not that much. I'm a pot smoking pro-choice atheist. I love show tunes and Judy Garland. I mean, I don't really have a comfortable home on the right wing. I mean, I've pissed off some of my followers. Like at the beginning of my podcast, I always say, welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, and that triggers some of my more conservative leaning audience members. But and also I think as an artist and creative, I mean, I think those people tend to lean more towards a liberal constitution. That the openness, it's just that I cling to that label because that's what feels most right for me. But it does not matter in terms of the entertainment industry because it's been seized by this ideology which says, oh, okay, well, if you don't believe, for instance, that human beings are a sexually dimorphic species, that means you hate trans people. I heard a rumor that my old alma mater, the NYU graduate acting program, which is one of the big three institutions, the other two being Yale and Juilliard, apparently you can't even say the term transformational actor anymore because it offends certain sexual minorities. There's a clip on YouTube of these kids who I recognize as NYU grad acting kids, and this guy's walking around the Washington Square Park in Lower Manhattan, and he's saying, he's talking about, men aren't women and men and women are different or whatever, and one of the girls begins crying, and the males rush in and like, hey man, stop that, get out of here. So these are our elite institutions right now, because these are where your stars come from, right? Like I was in school, I was at NYU at the same time that like Adam Driver, Tiona Paris, Corey Antonio Hawkins, and others were at Juilliard. We were all, studying around the same time. I go, see them in shows. They would come to see our shows. And so this is where all your big actors are coming from. Lupita Nyong'o was at Yale while I was finishing up at NYU. Just before she went on to do 12 Years a Slave and won an Oscar for that. She was so great in that. But these are the kinds of ideologies, because your writers are coming from these institutions, your directors are coming from these institutions, even your designers are coming from these institutions as well. And they become producers and casting people, so there is a very, very deep-seated ideological rot right now in these industries, which I think, it's irreversible. And so for me, I've not been able to get back to your question. I've not been able to practice my art the way that I have. I mean, I've excelled in everything from Shakespearean tragedy to musical comedy. I pride myself. I joke that diversity is my strength, and my career and my resume, my portfolio of work reflects that. But now I'm persona non grata, and as far as taking umbrage, yes, I'm very angry. I'm very. It's it's not. None of it was justified. I call it, and I said that they niggerized. It's the niggerization of the unvaccinated. That's what they did in the industry, and
that's a good book, right? That's a book title.
That's a book title.
No, I'm serious. I'm not
fly
joking.
off the shelves.
That might fly off the shelves because obviously the title. But it's an interesting point. I actually have 2 points. First, well, I actually want to talk about speaking of that word, which I might not use. In New York City, there was, it's kind of the vaccine passport kind of thing. You couldn't get into restaurants and whatnot. And as it turns out, obviously, I grew up in New York City, and it's a diverse place, no doubt. Probably the most diverse place. Maybe LA is these days, in the U.S. And but the Black population has had historic issues, say, with listening to the man, if the man is the government, public health, whatever. And there was far more vaccine hesitancy, as they call it, amongst Blacks than say whites or Asians, whatever, in New York City. And lo and behold, it was kind of like an apartheid application of who's going to get into restaurants and stores and whatnot based on race, because Blacks, the Tuskegee experiment, that kind of stuff. It's like, dude, we're not taking your stuff and whatnot.
The entire way that, and I hate to get political about it, but I mean, it has to be said, but the entire way that Democrats approached the pandemic was so insulting and so condescending to Black people. And by their own definition, it was racist. So the entertainment industry, just as a specific example, they really, in the wake of George Floyd's death, they really took to the idea of anti-racism, made famous by people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, our greatest living intellectual, obviously. That's a fucking moron. But according to Ibram X. Kendi, it's in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. A racist policy is one which creates disparate impact between different racial groups. And the vaccine passports and the vaccine mandates disproportionately had a negative impact, and school closures and all these other measures, it had a disproportionate impact on Black Americans. And to this day, there are still people who don't even know that. They don't understand that Black people did not take the vaccine at the rates that white people did. They don't care, frankly. And, it's funny because Democrats especially, they've spent generations, part of their, a central element of their political platform is about the past and present oppression of Black people. And so you have the same people who've been telling us for generations that the government, including the medical establishment, and the healthcare system is racially biased against us. But now you expect us to just line up and roll up our sleeves to take these brand new shots. And I'm down here in Atlanta, and I meet Black people all the time who are like, "Yeah, I didn't take it. I'm not taking that shit." And or they've taken it themselves, and and they're cool. But there's a class element of it as well. The more affluent people tend to be, the more they've taken it. But but the racial aspect of it is just, why would you expect Black people to just line up? And I remember in 2020, I was working at a nightclub, as a matter of fact. I got to meet all kinds of people, which is funny to me in and of itself, because in New York, everyone was panicking. But I'm sitting here literally, stopping fights and stopping drunk people from, shaking hands. That was my job, dealing with people. And, but every time, DMX, the rapper, passed away, what's the baseball player who passed away? Marvin Hagler passed away, the boxer. And people would say, "Hey, he took that vaccine, right? Marvin Hagler took that vaccine." So, whether the speculation is correct or not it was still happening, and it was still sowing more and more distrust. And the more they pushed, the more I think black people, were like, no, this isn't for me. But these mostly the blue bourgeoisie, these Democrats, a lot of these affluent white liberals and especially progressives said, no, you can't come into, I mean, it's insane to me. You can't come to the gym. You can't come to the museum. You can't come eat inside this restaurant, if you haven't taken the vaccine. And again, it was disproportionately blacks and Latinos who weren't taking the vaccine. And that's why, people clap back at me. I had a semi-viral tweet on Twitter where I said, quote unquote, unvaccinated is the new nigger. And people were like, well, obviously, you have a choice whether or not you can take the vaccine. I'm like, that's beside the point. The point is the treatment. And what you're really saying when you rebuke what I'm saying is that I am choosing for you to treat me like a nigger. That's what you're saying. So the point isn't whether or not one has a choice of what race they are. The point is the treatment. It's unethical. It's unjust. And it's creating disparities between races. And the fact that the people who claim to be warriors against racial injustice imposed, and in some places continue to impose these restrictions, is disgusting to me. And and I say this, I'll never trust these people again. They've shown who they really are. They've shown what they're really about. If the Trump years were about how people can be warped by anger, then the COVID years were about how people can be deranged by fear. And I don't think these people should ever be allowed to forget who they became and what they did. And I think, again, going back to the entertainment industry, these theaters are failing. Hollywood isn't seeing as much attendance as it was, again, in the 2018, 2019 season. And there are other arts institutions as well, like the opera, for instance, which are also failing right now. And I think part of the reason, based on the messages that I've gotten, is people have seen how they've either borne the brunt of these restrictions and these ridiculous mandates, or they've seen how people like me were treated, and they themselves have gotten the vaccine, and they said, I can't believe what they've done to people like you, Clifton. They'll look at my resume, they'll see some videos I've posted, like, he's so talented, he should be working right now, especially right now when they're diversity hiring left and right. Mm-hmm. And I actually have the chops to make these hires work. But people have looked at that and they said, no, I'm not supporting any of these institutions anymore, right, because of how disgustingly they behaved.
It's tricky. I went to Yale, not the drama school. Well, there was a fair amount of drama in the undergraduate, but we're asked to support the college all the time, financially, after the fact. And I have a lot of problems with it because, the actions of the institutions have been, what they think is what people want. It's kind of a demeaning form of racism. Thomas Sowell actually has a book. It's a compilation of essays that I read ages ago, probably 25 years ago. I think it's called White Liberals, Black Rednecks.
Black Rednecks and White Liberals, yeah.
Yeah, I got it backwards, but close enough. And but basically what his point was done quite some time ago, but it's very emblematic of today's situation where what you aptly called the blue bourgeoisie, which I think should be one word, the bourgeoisie. That's your next book right after the other one there, because I think that's real. Yeah. But the bourgeoisie think that authentic blackness is what was imparted from the redneck culture that the blacks were part of in Appalachia and South and so forth. From not the plantation owners, but the kind of the white underclass, and became the black underclass ethos. And a lot of the blacks in the North were not like that. There's always been a kind of a cultural thing. People talk about the Harlem Renaissance, but it's not so much a renaissance as a discovery of a lot of the essence of art and entertainment and culture and writing and reading that had been there. But the white focus, the white liberal focus, is more towards the kind of the rough, the violent, and so forth. Kind of less civilized parts. I mean, everything's a civilization in terms, but it's not necessarily that civil. And there's an emphasis towards that. And somehow it's going to be better for blacks if you kind of promote that, as opposed to standards and behaviors that have made whites as successful, contrarily. And blacks in the inner cities have, hereditary blacks, because they're Nigerians and Haitians and so forth. They were more recent immigrants. So, what you want to call, I don't know, the original Black Americans have somewhat been left behind by immigrant blacks from other, Africa and Caribbean and whatnot, because of the culture. And this is, I think, an essential part of Soul's message, that, we all need to work on the same matrix and standards and scaffolding, and in order to climb up. And there's nothing necessarily preventing that. And I think there's Charles Murray book, Coming Apart, which really is almost the same thing. How the bourgeoisie imparts and tries to map these, lesser behaviors that they don't themselves do. The left doesn't do that. They marry, they get together, they're much more religiously religious, and they've valued their institutions, but they kind of like insult them and expect kind of the underclasses, whether it's white or black, to get ahead by doing different standards which are more libertine rather than liberal.
Well, it's one of the reasons that years ago that I unregistered from the Democrat Party. I was doing a show. It was funny because it's like the eve of the 2016 election, and I was doing a show in Hartford, Connecticut, and I was walking around the apartment that they had me staying in. I was a bit stoned, but I had this revelation where I said, holy crap, there is no way that you can be a self-actualized, self-possessed, confident, happy Black person and remain a Democrat. If you become one of those people, they despise you, they don't see you, they dismiss you, they hate you. There's such a thing. I mean, Nicole Hannah-Jones, who I think is a moron, but she has a Pulitzer Prize, so what can I say? She once made the distinction between being, like Black and politically Black. And the problem right now, and as you pointed out, and this is why I became very compelled by arguments from more conservative-leaning people about, the problem is really culture, it's not really class. Because again, I'm here in Atlanta, right? And there's all kinds of people. You have, I've met working-class people, blue-collar guys who just bust their ass every day and do their work, and they go home and they're really grinding to make their lives work or make a better life for themselves. I've met professionals, lawyers, dentists, doctors. I've met entrepreneurs, I've met artists, but there's also some ghetto MFers down here as well. And the problem right now is that Chris Rock, the comedian, did one of the greatest pieces of cultural commentary I think ever in 1995. Is that the car stop? Say what?
Is that the car stop?
No. This was he did in 1995. He did a bit called he called it the Civil War in the Black community. And he said, there's Black people on one side and there's niggas on the other side, and niggas are ruining things for everybody else. And what's happening now, like when I was a kid, and it's interesting because again, it's about culture and class, more than race. Like I want to dive more into his work, but Theodore Dalrymple in London has observed
my
the same thing.
He's awesome.
Well, he's observed some of the same things like in these white British, underclass youth, right? And so, people would say people like me were trying to act white because of the way that I spoke or the way that I dressed or whatever. But now what's happening is that it's not just this underclass of people who are saying you're acting white. Now you have, again, this bourgeoisie who they've got their PhDs, they've got their Pulitzer Prizes, they've got their MSNBC hosting gigs, they've got their gigs at the New York Times. Ironically, they're being upheld by this white power establishment, but they're saying that if you, for instance, I'm sure you remember that famous or infamous Smithsonian, it was the Museum of African American Art, a subsidiary of the Smithsonian Museum. They put out this ridiculous poster that said things like, punctuality, self-discipline, rugged individualism. These are all things that are tenets of white culture, white supremacist culture. Literally anything you could do to improve your life. It said, you're striving for whiteness. I had an argument with an old roommate in Harlem, was talking about striving for financial success is striving for whiteness. Or really, so the Japanese businessman, the Nigerian businessman, He's trying to be white. And that's the thing. I'm glad you brought up Africans, because Black Africans do not like Black Americans. They don't respect them at all. And people don't really talk about this. The focus is so much on white people. But when I was in New York, or the city formerly known as New York, every African immigrant that I spoke to was like, no, I don't, what's wrong with Black Americans? What's wrong with Black people? And straight up, they would say, they complain all the time. They don't work hard. Same thing with West Indians. You know what I mean? There was a sketch on the show In Living Color back in the day, which was a parody. It was a recurring sketch called Hey Man. And the Wayans, Keenan and Kim and all these other, they're playing these Jamaicans, and the punchline of every joke was like, what you mean you can't find a job? I'm a maintenance man, I'm a plumber, I'm a farmer, I'm a doctor, I'm a line cook, I'm a mechanic. You can't find, and that was the stereotype. That you got these Caribbeans and West Indians coming down here and getting a bunch of jobs, and yet these Black Americans not only. And it's not black, and the thing is, it's not all Black Americans. It's this ghetto culture, right? It's this ghetto subculture, which, as you pointed out, and as Thomas Sowell pointed out, I mean, that book, Black Rednecks and White Liberals, really shifted my perspective on things, because we talk about white trash, but we can't talk about ghetto trash. You know what I mean? And for some reason, I think part of the reason is the explosion of hip hop. And I'm not one of these people who. I'm a huge nerd or used to be a huge nerd about hip hop culture. It's been a powerful voice for those, who don't have a voice. And, at its best, it combines. At its best, it's a mode of self-expression. It's a mode of kind of putting self-assertion, putting your finger up to the man, as you say, finding ways to express yourself, sort of defying authority, but also there's a huge amount of coming from nothing, hustling and grinding and finding your way, making something out of yourself, being an individual. These are sort of deeply baked into hip hop culture. But in terms of mainstream hip hop culture and rap music specifically, what's become very commercially popular, especially now, it's so disgusting. All kinds of just the worst kind of cultural behaviors now. And now, for some reason, that's become the accepted, this is Black America. This is part of our culture, our quote unquote, our culture. But someone like Thomas Sowell, he's an Uncle Tom. Someone like myself or Larry Elder, they're not politically Black, and thus they are not Black in the eyes of the bourgeoisie, who themselves derive their entire existence and living and their prestige from this very same white establishment, which they claim they want to dismantle. So I question their motives on that front. But so the whole point of what I'm saying is that now, not just from the underclass, but now from this upper class as well, there's an ideological pincer, which is forcing people into. Forcing Black people to identify in a certain way. And anyone who breaks beyond that is seen as not part of the tribe in this sort of collectivist vision. And that includes, I've literally seen, Randall, I've seen Black students at Yale complaining because they're paranoid about being replaced by Africans. Are you kidding me?
Well, that's a thing. Every year, New York Times, whatever, they all post the guy or gal who got into every school he applied to. And, I applied to 20 schools. I got into Stanford, Yale, blah, 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 Harvard, Princeton. Okay. You don't even have to look. What it's going to be is it's a Nigerian kid in Long Island. I'm serious. Year after year. That's who it is.
Well, even in the entertainment industry, look at some of the top actors, right? It's Uzo Aduba, my ex-girlfriend, Emmy-winning actress, Idris Elba, who everyone loves, you know what I mean? Top actor, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Oscar winner for 12 Years a Slave, David Oyelowo, another Nigerian actor. They're all Nigerians. That's not an accident. So, it's hilarious to watch this unfold.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like that's replacement Black. There's some guys. So I reconnected with a relative recently, and he's in his 50s, and very shy guy. Well-meaning. He's an engineer. He worked hard, all kind of stuff, but painfully shy. And there's a kind of a semi-derogatory term called incel, involuntarily celibate. And it's a sad thing. Frankly, Jordan Peterson was brought to tears by an interviewer. Said, you've been known to defend the incels, and as if somehow that's bad. He's like, and why shouldn't they be defended? These are people. They've been marginalized. Do they not deserve happiness? They've made fun of. You're making fun of them right now. They're involuntarily celibate. Would they not benefit from learning how to get some of the keys to success so they can become more confident and et cetera. And anyway, he wound up what I call getting a replacement bride. He could
Mm.
not compete in the current market of say American feminism, and so you can probably guess he has a bride from Asia. And I'm not sure how they met, whether what the site is. I mean, you can do it these days, and they have a child. So he's starting that life. It's a little bit late, but he's supremely happy. He's a nice kid. I mean, I knew him when he was a baby. He's a smart kid, all kind of stuff. And does he not deserve happiness? He's providing happiness. He's bringing a life into the world, and he has a sense of completion that he didn't have for a long period of time. But he had to go outside, and I think that's what people have to do. You have to kind of go outside. It's a sadness. If I mean, I think at some point, I mean, there's a joke I thought of today for some other reason, but there's a joke. How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to really, really want to be changed. And I was using this as a corollary to the Black community, as it were. I hate that term, communities, but for the Black urban underclass, they have to want to change at some point. You can't keep changing them. All this kind of application of wanting to change them, I think Bill Cosby, pre fall, was useful on this topic, and wanting Blacks to do better within their own culture and find these objects of success and whatnot. So I think you really hit the nail on the head in a lot of different ways.
Well, see, and here, but the problem there again is that, and this is again a reason why I left the Democrat Party, and why I think that they're doing far more harm and damage, is that they're instilling. I mean, I had a viral thread many moons ago about if I were a white supremacist, and it's basically everything that that the bourgeoisie is doing. Their point of view, their ideas, their ideology has permeated sports, entertainment, the press, our educational system. And so they're instilling these self-limiting beliefs, and the thing is, and it's weird because going back to hip hop culture, right? There's so much, I mean, even Cornel West has sort of criticized this in the past, but this idea of materialism, but trying to make money and trying to make something of yourself. I mean, I was listening to the rapper Nas on his latest album. I think it's called King's Disease 3, or one of his latest albums. But he's talking about solve your problems yourself, make something out of yourself. Mm-hmm. So there's this huge attitude in certain aspects that you are what you make of yourself, even if society is racist. It's still on you to make something of yourself.
Absolutely. And, you have to go through the minefields.
But the thing is, but that attitude now is just, people will say that you're a coon or you're an Uncle Tom, and or you're thinking like a white person, and it's I mean, I don't know.
Fortunately, I haven't had that problem. I mean, I personally, I don't see color. Just joking, but nobody tells us that. It's a funny thing, I'm Jewish and I grew up in New York City, and Jews historically have done well financially. People don't really wonder why that is. I think it might have something to do with the fact that Jews were not allowed to own property in the Pale of Russia, and in other places as well. They were not allowed to hold land, and so you couldn't be a farmer. You couldn't have something and build it up and build a house and so forth. So you had to have your wealth and accumulation all up in your noggin. You had to have a trade and a craft, so that if the Cossacks come and you had to transplant and move someplace else, you could still be that person. So obviously a lot of trading and whatnot, but then became intellectual. If you knew how to do dental work, you could pick up and travel the globe and still be a dentist. And so there was kind of like a little bit of training. There are ethnic stereotypes, and they're not all wrong because people observe things. I mean, in part of my practice, we did a big immigration bit, and Nigerians, getting back to them, would come in, and they were very, very, very demanding. They were if you didn't see them physically, you'd think, oh, these guys are Jewish. They were always, quibbling about price. They would, mention that they'd been quoted something else that we never did at some discount, and they were very demanding. They wanted everything yesterday, and it was very different from, say the Brazilians who came in, who were far more laid back, whatnot. Anyway, there were kind of class, you know, characteristics of different groups. I mean, and what is it that makes everybody want to do that kind of thing? It's a push, it's an urge, and so forth. I'm not going to get the motivations. Anyway, we're kind of rounding out the hour. I had a question that kind of came to mind when you were talking about your not vaccinating, which I think is a wise choice if you've had the illness. And I'm going to quote the great Dr. Fauci, if I may, as my own little acting foray. But in 2004, 2005, somewhere in there, you can find on C-SPAN. Nobody popularizes this, but he goes on. He's talking about one of those flus, whether it's avian flu or something like that, and says the question is, should you get the flu shot if you've already had this flu? So this flu shot for this flu, not next year's flu shot, not flu 5 years ago. You just had this flu. Should you now get this year's flu shot? So he says, of course you should. There's no reason you should ever get a flu shot for the illness you've just had. Having the natural illness gives you full natural immunity. You've seen every protein on that virus. The flu shot is just one little piece of it. There's no reason to do this. It's, anyway, he goes on.
Bravo, Randall. Good job.
Thank you. It's superfluous to do this. And current Fauci, 20x years later, never says this. Nobody brings it up. And people who bring it up, they get all that, fact checking, blah, blah, blah. He didn't mean this. He wasn't talking about COVID. And now we have this thing called the booster. And I actually believe in the booster. If you look at our, the actual letters, there's a B and an S in it. It is BS. The other, I don't know what the other letters are, Uter, something like that. But the booster is a non-thing. This has never been practiced in medical realm, where you keep using the antiquated, ancestral, anachronistic previous virus, which is totally gone, ancestral SARS-CoV-2 from 2019-2000, and then you keep giving it to people as a challenge. People wonder why this this COVID shot works less and less well. It's because it's the wrong thing. You're basically giving the police a picture of Alec Baldwin, who might shoot people and punch paparazzi. And he was around 2019, 2020. And then Stephen Baldwin and Daniel Baldwin, these variant strains of Alec Baldwin show up. They're not Alec Baldwin. They're less dangerous. And then 5 years later, Haley Baldwin shows up. I mean, she's technically a Baldwin. That's Omicron. And there's no reason to immunize or prevent her from coming to your parties one day. She's not going to shoot anybody. She's not going to punch any paparazzi. And that's what we have now, Omicron. And we're getting the same Alec Baldwin shot as prevention. So I applaud you on that, but the question here is, what do you think of the act as an actor? What do you think of the acting jobs that, say, Peter Hotez, if you're familiar with him, and or Dr. Fauci have put out when they, suddenly veer away from their actual long-held medical beliefs?
Well, I think part of my frustration over the past few years has been that I think people don't understand that there really are people out there who will lie, and I mean, I'm serious, like
that bears repeating,
because or they think that a villainous person is going to be like Snidely Whiplash or something and twirling a mustache, and especially if you've binged enough true crime, you understand what every story starts out the same way, doesn't it? He was a highly respected doctor, she was a powerful lawyer, but they had all the trappings of success, but behind closed doors, and so the most evil people among us, and I've used that word more in the past 3 years than I have ever in my life, but evil people or corrupt people, the most evil and corrupt among us are those who can blend in with the rest of us. They're those who can just look at the camera and just completely just say a bunch of nonsense, BS as you called it, without any compunction, and they make it believable. And that to me, the murderer, the rapist, the burglar or whatever, the armed robber, that is evil. That is easy for us to see and detect. But when someone comes on and there's sort of a sort of kindly seeming octogenarian person with, with this Brooklyn accent, or someone like Peter Hotez who just looks like a mess, but, it just seems, pretty unassuming. Um, but it just becomes clear over time that they're not, what they're saying and doing is not for you, but it's more for their own benefit. I mean, I love that clip from Carrie Mullis, back in, I forgot when the clip was, but he said, Anthony Fauci has no problem looking right into the camera and lying to the American people. And, and you see him, there was that great CNN clip the other day of Smirkonish just, destroying him on masks. And we've all seen that footage of Anthony Fauci being like, no one should be walking around wearing masks. There's no reason, you get the schmutz and everything. And, we just, so, but then like a month later, he completely reverses his decision. And it's weird because at the beginning, back in January through March 2020, people were like, even my friends were like, yeah, man, the mask ain't really going to help you, bro. And so, but then the quote unquote science changed and this virus became so novel. I mean, I bought a box of 50 surgical masks back in like February 2020, before everyone was like masking up. And I mean, I overpaid. It cost me like $75 from Amazon because they were sold out everywhere already.
Right.
And even on the box, on the box, it says, I mean, I presume the manufacturer didn't want to get sued for false advertising, but it's like they can't stop viruses,
Not.
And it just became.
If you had scuba gear, if you actually look at the Wuhan Institute, and what they do in the virology labs is they wear basically scuba gear. But if you're wearing a paper mask, and if anything that you would go underwater with, and it wouldn't work, you shouldn't use, because I mean, when you put this mask on, you're still breathing. The air is soup, and all the soup has whatever people sneezed and whatnot, and you're going to breathe it in. Maybe it's going to be, the root is going to be sideways, so forth. But air is going to go through the path of least resistance.
My favorite is when you see these guys. I saw one just yesterday with these gigantic beards, but they have this like little surgical mask strap. I'm like, guy, like your hair is all sticking out everywhere. How are you protecting yourself? Or people who like, are supremely overweight wearing masks to protect themselves from. I'm like, you would do a lot more to change your diet and exercise regimen than wearing this stupid mask. And, some people can never be saved, I think. I don't know.
No, it's a sadness. And I'm sure you get called anti-vax. I came up with this thought for anti-vax. So the cartoon, I want to write this cartoon or have somebody draw it for me. I'm sure you've seen people in your peregrinations through the cities. It might be 90 degrees out, but some guy's got 5 layers of clothing on. He's got a parka, a hat and all this kind of stuff. It's like he's clothing inappropriate. And usually for me, that means this person has, mental illness or whatever. So it's 90 degrees. You're wearing an appropriate bathing suit or something like that on the beach, whatever. Somebody comes along with 15 pairs of clothing on, a parka, gloves and mittens, and all that kind of stuff, and says, "Oh my God, you are anti-clothing. You are not wearing any clothing. You just have that little tiny bathing suit on. Get some clothes on, or else I'm going to freeze." It's like, wait a minute. No, you have too much clothing on. I have the appropriate amount of clothing for my situation. And this is, I think, to the anti-vax argument. I've given out tens of thousands, maybe at least thousands of vaccines over the years, and I've taken the flu shot every year. I like vaccines. I think they've done very good things for smallpox, et cetera. But I don't give every vaccine to everybody. There is a yellow fever vaccine. I've never given a single dose of it. It has never come up. I'm not in West Africa. I don't have to do it. It's never come up. And maybe it's a good vaccine, maybe it's not. I haven't researched it. But all of a sudden, everyone said, "Oh, you all have to take this because somebody had yellow fever." It's like, no, we don't all have to do this. Everything has to be age graded and personal graded. That is getting back to the art of medicine, going back to my previous example of the barefoot doctors. The doctors here have been turned into barefoot doctors. We've been turned into drones. And when I say I don't mean the aerial drones, I mean drone workers that we're only supposed to do our orders. And if you've actually had an independent medical thought, you get hauled in front of the medical boards and so forth. And this is a sadness. So I think there are some analogies between our professions. Anyway, I'm going to give you time for closing thoughts before I show people your Substack and your Twitter and so forth.
Well, I think just in response to what you've said, I mean, it seems to me that what's been exposed to a lot of people, for a lot of people, is that the sort of phenomenon you're talking about seems to be rampant across all professions. There's this corporatism, this careerism. People they just fall in line. I mean, I have a lawyer friend she's brilliant. She's working on these big cases right now, as far as the pandemic is concerned, and she's the only person I know whose life has actually improved as a
Mhm.
result of the pandemic. But I was asking her. Well, her story is that she was a lawyer in she was working at this legal firm in New York, and her politics apparently weren't left leaning enough for that particular firm, so they wouldn't really promote her and yada yada yada. So eventually, she ended up leaving, and now she's gotten married, and she's like, her career has exploded and she's doing all these great things. But whether it's the legal profession, the medical profession, the arts and entertainment, it just seems like there is all this pressure, this intense pressure to just go along, go with the flow, don't rock the boat. Even if you see something that's wrong or something that's, that's a mistake, um, you kind of just turn a blind eye to it for purposes of, well, you have a nice situation, you got a nice car, you got a nice house, you got a wife and kids, you got a you got a pension, you got health insurance.
It would be
Why
a
would
shame
you?
if anything happened to those.
And that's what they hold over you. So, I think what I've learned is that the sort of kind of bookending the conversation, bringing it back to the ancient Greeks, or the antiquity. One of the things that I find so moving now about what they're saying is, these ideas of virtue, and what are the four Stoic virtues? I'm always going to forget them, but temperance, courage, justice, and I always forget one of them,
Mhm.
and I'm going to get dinged on it. But it's this idea that you do good things because they are good,
Mhm.
and you tell the truth, and this sort of moral strength and this sort of courage has been completely lost in our culture. And it's difficult, and it's difficult to make choices every day for the good because they're good, and to tell the truth because we're in. I don't know how you get us out of this ditch, but it seems like we're in a place where the truth, you're punished for. I mean, I think it's always been such, hasn't it? You're punished more
Right.
for the truth than for telling
Right.
lies.
Yeah. Well, now Galileo, Jesus, it's not always been an easy, affair. People have a lot of power in groups, and they don't necessarily act rationally in groups. I think the Germans were good people. They had the kind of top-notch civilization, maybe the pinnacle through the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I mean, they were Austrians, but they were the eastern branch of Germans. I think any group of people can be good, they can be bad. It's kind of like your hair. You can comb it one way, or you can comb it another. You can make it into curls. You can do things with it, en masse. And I think if fish. There's a thing called schooling of fish. When the fish all move, in the tropics, you're swimming, snorkeling, you see them all swim. They all swim one direction. They all flip directions. Like I don't have no idea how they all know how to do it, but they're all watching each other. And there's some strength in being a herd of fish, school of fish, and they school. But a lot of our schooling has been, we've kind of transmuted the fish term to ourselves. So we've gotten schooling, but now we are schooling like the fish. We're all in one direction because that is the way we can stay strong and not get picked off and eaten individually. So I'm going to pop up your some of your pages here. This is your Twitter page, and it's very lively. I recommend it. And uh, we have here, I'm very impressed. You've got Scott Adams on it. I'm a huge fan. Figure out how I can get Scott Adams on my show. I'll be in your debt forever. But this is the Clifton Duncan YouTube channel. And great stuff, as you imagine. It's been a captivating interview, and people should really follow you and also pay you money through your Substack and any other modalities. That's I also like to leave with a shameless self-promotion. If people want to support my podcast, I don't have any of those things, but I do have a book out on the previous pandemic, Zika. It's called Overturning Zika, the Pandemic That Never Was. It has a picture of me on the front right here. You can buy the book, preferably read it, but at least buy it and help me out. And what else? I think that's pretty much it. It was a fascinating pandemic. A lot of the same characters were there.
Hmm.
Dr. Fauci, WHO, and whatnot. For Zika microcephaly, it was an aggrandized phenomenon. Zika is a real virus. Microcephaly is a real phenomenon. It just so happens, in retrospect, that one never caused the other. and they have still not realized it because they are being paid to do so. So there's been no reformulation, retractions, reconsiderations, or anything like that amongst the public health community. Women in the tropics still operating under this false premise that a single mosquito bite can unalterably, damage a cherished life within during early pregnancy. And it's a sadness, but they live in fear. And the people who make money off this, they don't really care. So that's, I think, in league and a similar theme to what we have today.
Yeah, sounds on brand.
All right. So final words. I'm going to let you go otherwise.
Not really. I mean, I guess the last thing I would say is my bit of self-promotion is to don't forget I have a Rumble channel as well. That's kind of really growing. I mean, all this stuff has kind of been by accident, but now I'm going to try to deliberately grow it. But I have a Rumble channel. It's Clifton Duncan. I'm also Locals. Is linked. So if you want to sign up there, I've been in contact with the good people at Rumble and Locals are going to try to help me build that channel up. So, sign up there for that community and again, support me so I don't become a starving artist. And it'll help me not only keep doing podcasts and keep writing, which I enjoy doing, but also produce other stuff, which I've got a lot of ideas. So so I would love you all if you would visit me over there and sign up.
All right, well, perfectly. I'm going to ask a favor online. I have a movie treatment for my Overturning Ziga book, and it fictionalizes basically the essence of what happened, but it's much more exciting in a way, by a great writer. And if anybody has any ideas or connections how to make that happen, maybe you might want to hover over and find the book and see if you like the concept that I'm promoting. I'd be interested in getting your thoughts and anybody else's about this. Just PM me on my own Twitter channel, which is Dr. Randall Bach, spelled like this, DR in front of my name without the S. So thank you so much for coming on, Clifton. It's been an amazing time for me. I've learned so much, and I think we coined a couple phrases along the way.
Yeah, I'm stealing bourgeoisie. Thanks, Randall. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
All right, bye-bye.